Just feel that way. Or maybe it's good.
Hello? Oh, yeah, this is good. We don't have feedback. Oh, no, we have feedback. Hello? Okay, now we don't have feedback. This is perfect. Okay, do I put in the camera? Thank you.
Well, your stuff, you didn't like something. Yeah, that was saying.
Okay,
And then I had in that Zoom camera.
perfect. It's that's different angles.
Oh.
Okay. So thank you very much for joining us by Davos. We have Noah Gassi here and Professor Abbasi.
Be worldwide.
Be worldwide. Thank you very much for joining us here in Davos. It is promising to be an interesting panel, and we will discuss some implications about ethics, AI, and further festivals. So I would like to give you the opportunity to present yourself for a second. I thought we focus about it.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Professor Salma Abbasi, and I'm the chairperson and CEO of eWorldwide Group. We work with governments and development agencies to drive meaningful digital transformation that is inclusive and sustainable. I'm also a part-time professor and teaching ethical AI and AI for SDGs around the world.
And I'm Dr. Noah Gaffney. I'm a managing director at FSG and an adjunct professor at Columbia University. I'm really passionate about bringing people together against polarization, as well as responsible AI to drive more responsible innovation.
So thank you very much. Let's start out with what do you see as the biggest challenge right now? And let's start really at the beginning from humans using AI, not from the app. I thought with who wants to take it first?
Thank you. I think it's a very good question. When you start talking about humans versus AI, there needs to be a combination of both. What I'm finding in our work that we have a lot of people who have these high expectations of what AI can deliver. And now that we're looking at quantum innovation, we have even more data and even more compute power, but we still don't really know what's going to be the unintended consequences of this. So in the work that we're trying to drive and in collaboration is make sure that as we use artificial intelligence and other forms of advanced technologies, we're able to have an equitable platform where people from all over the world can benefit from these new innovations and not broaden the digital divide. The biggest concern I have, first, is the digital divide and now the quantum divide, but also the ungoverned spaces where we currently lack the regulations, the frameworks, and the, let's say, the governance around this new technology that would ensure that technology isn't going to be harmful for people. And I can say more later.
Just to counterbalance a little bit with the private sector perspective, research from Forbes last week showed that only half of companies have a data policy for AI, and 90% are thinking of investing more in the next few years, right? So we know that this is a huge challenge when it comes to humans using AI because we're not sure what we're in for, especially corporate leaders. They know that they need to get in the race, but they don't actually know how to protect their employees. They don't know how to protect their customers. They don't know how to protect their data. And that's just the baseline, right? We're not even talking about how do we leave people behind. We're talking about, you know, these are supposed to be the leaders that are innovating in this space, and they're still talking about it. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to humans using AI.
Okay, and now we start with the same question when we consider what are the biggest problems in implementing AI in several workflows. We all are, of course, aware of examples like discrimination, where AI finds certain names and discriminates against certain population by employment, We know also when you don't use AI to write a resume properly, you don't get a job. So what do you think is the biggest problem from firms to include it in the workflow? And more specifically, what is the problem for the firm, not for discrimination, but for their success?
In my former life, I was the chief quality officer for Lucent Technologies, and it was quality systems. And one of the most important things that I remember, and I still bring with me technology, if I was to advise a company, I would always say, what is your business process? What is the purpose and objective of what you have? What do you want to do? There has to be a meaning for the application of technology. We don't need to recommend to the C level or whoever level that buy technology just for the sake of it. So one of the biggest challenges I feel is in understanding your workflow, understanding how technology in partnership with humans in the middle are going to make us better and more efficient. I think the awareness of the risks is also very important with how technology is going to be used in decision making. Having a human in the loop within a corporation or within any civil society organization, when we look at AI and quantum innovations, is really critical. And as Noah said, having the policies and the governance framework is really important, and also making sure that you have a quality monitoring system of the impact of the technology that's integrated, because fine-tuning and refinement is always going to be needed.
I think there's a really strong point there about the impact that you're making. And so, especially where I'm from in the US right now, there's a huge backlash on diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a huge backlash on environmental, social, and governance issues. But the reality is, it's at the heart of the AI revolution, right? If you think about, we need good governance, we need it to be sustainable, we need it to be socially sound and responsible. And so I think, you know, we're facing this conversation at a time where there's so much pushback around the ethical, you know, but the ethical implications are really core to how we succeed in the AI. So I think if you're looking to hire people and you're just discriminating against a whole swath of a group that is unable to bring diverse and interesting and unique talent to your organization, who's missing out more, right? It's your organization. So I think we have to be really thoughtful about the ways in which actually leads to conversations.
Can I answer that? I think that you bring to my mind a very important point of filtering. AI is being used a lot in HR to filter CVs. And exactly as Noah said, we will be losing, because of how we program it, the bias in the algorithm may be used. You're going to lose those innovators, those out-of-the-box thinkers that could really be adding value to your corporation. I think that's really important to consider.
So before we go to quantum and one more question on AI. We all think about the problem from AI and the discrimination from AI, but that's a different kind of how AIs are trained and how AI is developed. For example, Versus has a total other approach than the machine learning programs from ChatGPT to train AI. Do you see there some AIs which are more from the unethical, or some AIs which are basically more resistant when you compare, for example, Versus, where the AI learns like a human being instead of version 1, version 2, version 3. But we know also the problems that not every human being becomes Mother Teresa. So, and we know also like there's the other systematic problem when we human beings try to change something that is problem. And probably I thought with you some thoughts to it.
I think it's a great question because humans are biased, and we've been debating ethics for thousands of years. And so why do we think that an algorithm that we train, even if it has more information than we could ever process ourselves, you know, if we're inputting human values and human ethics and human biases into the system, of course it's going to create chaos. On the other hand, if we don't do anything, it's just going to divert to the lowest common denominator, and there won't be any guardrails. So I think this is a really, really interesting question. I don't think one platform is necessarily better than another. I think everything has its pros and cons. But I think we need to be really mindful about the trade-offs and the expectations that we have might be unrealistic, right? And so how do we grapple with that?
Thank you. I completely agree. There is pros and cons in either which way you take with our AI. I think one of the most important things is, as Noah said, looking at the programmer themselves, your unintentional biases that you're putting you're not aware of. The ethical challenge becomes whose values, whose morals, whose ethics. And when we talk about the global now connected world, whether we're sitting in Asia or whether we're sitting in Europe, America, or Latin America, we all have different values. And what we may see is acceptable could be completely unacceptable in the Middle East. So when I look, a simple example is how we find information online and how certain countries are taking the position now to block their platforms so that you can't actually see certain data. So there's an interesting, let's say, evolution now, movement within governments of what people can actually see. That means the data will be blocked. So when we start doing the analysis, what data is actually being used to make that decision? So unless we're aware of what data we're accessing, the issue of risk and the issue of ethical bias and diversity's bias will be just growing in this new world that we.
I think just to build on that, there's so much content from the global south that doesn't make it to these models, right? And so we also have to think about what we're training these models on is not complete, right? And so, you know, there are language barriers, there are other barriers to putting information online. And so your point earlier about the digital divide, we're not even thinking about the ways that we're missing out. You know, the builders of the models is the ones that are really trying to craft the future. But we're missing this large swath of information that exists from different perspectives around the world.
Thank you. So this, we have not only in this panel speak about AI, we have also some advancement in quantum physics. We have, of course, models in quantum physics which are used. We see also often when models are used, that models become disastrous. For example, when we see that the model in economics is developed, and then people believe that the model becomes reality, and try to force a model to predict an outcome, like for example, the communist manifest, and then say this is a reality. We see a whole economy from the Soviet Union basically collapsing. So it's always dangerous for researchers when you see a model to not fall so much in love to say it is like this, just to be like Needle 4 was totally happy that he developed the Bohr model, and then we saw that it's a little bit more complicated outcome, and yeah, we still use the Bohr model for something, but not for everything. So in quantum physics, there's different models, and there's different philosophies, and they influence us. My question is, what do you see there for problems with different models, and then afterwards become in the AI computing and how this influence our daily life?
Thank you very much. I think the first thing is I'm going back to AI and in saying that AI is not new. We've been having algorithms and writing code since the 80s. I remember using Fortran when I was in university. Now we have the complete power. We have the ability to crunch more data. Therefore, we need more data, but we need accurate data. We need diversified data from different parts of the world. So when we use quantum innovation today, we need to be able to ensure that all of the information that is going in is diverse. It has to be coming. So my recommendations in this space for research is that we collaborate with universities around the world. So more global models are put into this big machine to crunch and give us ideas, models, and recommendations. I believe that when we look at the biggest problems at the moment with the money, the way the finances are, only a few countries can actually afford quantum computing capacity and capability. We need to somehow bridge that gap so that the models that we create are actually going to be richer and more realistic to the problems that we're trying to solve in the future, whether it's in healthcare or climate, which we do need. this collaboration is going to ensure that rich data is being crunched with our quantum capability.
Your question about models, I think it's a really interesting one, and if I use the economic model parallel, you can look at communism in the former Soviet Union versus in China. You can look at the way that in Chile, they collaborated with the University of Chicago economists in the 70s and 80s to create this very neoliberal type economy. And I think everything taken to an extreme can be a challenge, right? Where I've seen a lot of success is when models build on each other and we reach some sort of mixture of ideas, right? And that's why we're in Davos, because that's really one of the special places in the world where you can bring in different stakeholders. So the problem with quantum models is that there's not enough transparency, right? And so how do we think about ways that we can learn from each other and collaborate, not just on the outcomes, but also on the process? And obviously there's a huge challenge with the quantum process as well in terms of transparency. And so thinking through all of these pieces, I think is, how do we think about more transparency, more trust, and just the ability to build on each other, I think will be really interesting.
I'd like to add to that if I may. When you say I totally agree on the trust issue, the other is me. The other is my model, my data, my benefits. So one of the things I'm very concerned about as technology accelerates is the commercialization. Now we have companies that are larger than GDPs of countries, which is a huge problem. When we start looking at the fear that this is my innovation, this is my ISP, I want to be able to see how am I going to commercialize this. We start leading into the ethical challenge, but for my benefit, I'm going to compromise with you. So the risk, and as you were saying, Noah, that the collaboration part is important. I know that last year the UAE Technology Institute collaborated with AMD. So research collaboration on building the model and having implemented points to measure the outcome and the impact so that adjustments can be made is very important.
I know there were some attempts also to use blockchain in basically AI and other areas, just to retract the data into the origin of the data and overcome the black box problem. Because right now you have like a child and AI learns something wrong. You need a lot of right information to get it right again. And it was trained wrong. And when it's talking, you have like basically like a string of pairs in the whole ball of pairs, and you can just take this information out and make it selectively forget. I've teenage daughters. I would love to have this possibility. So, what is your knowledge? What do you hear about this? What is your take on AI and blockchain?
So I think it's a really interesting perspective. I think it's a really interesting perspective in terms of, I'm not sure.
Okay, this camera is still on.
Oh,
This
okay.
is the main one.
Okay, great.
So
Sorry.
then you're on this.
Totally good.
Yeah.
Oh, there it goes. So, the blockchain example is a really interesting one because yes, of course, we could really selectively take out information and have it retrain the AI in a way that is more productive, then of course that would be beneficial. I'm not sure it's that simple, right? Because every piece of input refines the model, right? And so can it really selectively forget by taking out one piece of information? Is that going to change? Could be, could not be. I think as a parent, I feel you in terms of, if only it were that easy. Yes, of course we would all do it.
Exactly, it's impossible. I think so.
It's impossible. But I think another thing about blockchain which I find really interesting is that it increases transparency but not trust, right? And so, yes, of course, it's great to know what the data is, where it's coming from, what the sources it's coming from, right? I think that level of transparency is fantastic. But trust is a uniquely human experience, right? We have to, it's a feeling, it's an emotion, right? Attached to a piece of information, right? Do we think it's accurate? Do we believe something about it, right? So it's really interesting when I hear about blockchain building trust, it's a mechanism for it, but it's not the same thing. So that's just one that I wanted to get out there.
I think, coming back to the algorithm and us to be able to understand where the data is coming from, it's almost like a breadcrumb that we can find a source. But it's not so easy to find out what we did with that information. That level of transparency isn't there. Companies and engineers are afraid to share this because it's their intellectual property rights. They feel this is my advantage. I don't want the competition to know what I'm doing, otherwise they'll build a better model on what I've done. The second thing is, I think in this area, a lot of research is currently happening with the IEEE in a collaborative manner, where we're creating frameworks and schema to really go and dig deeper into digital trust to understand what does that mean, not just from the human side, which is not paramount, but it's also from the components, from the design, from all of the motion that you can track and see. Blockchain is absolutely, you can see where you're going. It's almost like a mapping. But if one block is taken out by some reason, you need to know that that was taken out and what's the crumbling effect from it. So in my opinion, when we start moving in these technologies that have a huge consequence to society and to the planet at large, we need to again build that bridge with other stakeholders in this space. University collaboration and the startup collaboration is a must. Using the platforms like the IEEE is recommended by me. It's an open discussion on agentive AI. We've just finished a framework, which is open source. Everybody can take a look at what we've done with the schema, identifying the risks, what to do if there's how do you put human in the loop, what's the consequences in any and every dimension. What happens when things are ended of life? When you take this data set and you don't collect it anymore, and it's part of your equation. The risk that comes from, as I say, pulling the block out, we're not aware of. It's only once it's happened, but what's that consequence and impact to the end decision that you were relying on? Those things that we don't openly talk about is what's happening in the real world in that ecosystem of data.
And even when you take a block out,
Yes.
and even when you take a block out, you don't know the ripple effect.
Yes.
It's basically like in the film, what's it called, butterfly effect. You go back and you try to change something, but you don't know what every single thing. When I would follow up this trust, I know trust is basically, and it belongs to like synchronizing with cognition and affection is an attitude. So then it's affection, but we know it's also cognition influence. Do you think by blockchain that there is right now, because blockchain is always advertising, you don't need trust because everything is open. Do you think that the affective component that people don't like it and still don't trust it is basically based on cognition or missing behavior and adoption from blockchain or something else?
So again, I think, do people trust blockchain as transparent? Do people think blockchain is transparent, or do they see it as a replacement for trust? Those are two totally different things. I think there's a huge lag on adoption because people don't necessarily understand what blockchain is, how it works. And of course that's creating a huge lag, right? I also think there's a system in place, a whole financial services system that is focused on, holding that power, holding that information, creating barriers to things, right? So when you think about some of the practical applications, there are a lot of people who's interested in ensuring that it's not adopted, right? So there's a lot of resistance to the acceptance of the blockchain as a principle, but also in some of its practical applications. Where I would say it gets really interesting is, again, that distinction between transparency and trust. They're not the same thing, right? Transparency can lead to trust. Sometimes it can lead to distrust, right? If we think about different examples of when it's too much information, right? It's just we're overloaded with information. This is where I think AI can be a really interesting filter for some of that information overload that we're experiencing. So, I think it's in some ways, some of the polarization that we see online is a result of too much information. People were overwhelmed and they needed shortcuts, right? And so I think they just trusted people that looked like them and behaved like them. And that was some of the opportunity to just shortcut the overwhelm of information that they were receiving every day because they didn't really know what they should believe as a result of all this information. So I think there's a lot of complexity here.
I'm now going to switch this in the context of young people. Recently we've heard that Meta has taken away the fact checkers and the content moderators for Facebook, Instagram in the US only at the moment. When we start looking at the data and we look at the affinity of deepfake, we look at synthetic images, and we look at misinformation being pushed online, the disinformation that's going online, the polarization in society, the impact of children. I start talking about trust in the context of what is real for them. My generation would open the Encyclopedia Britannica with no this is a fact. The real challenge today, trust, is we have our children looking at social media every day, and they even say to me, let me just Google it, and I'm looking at them thinking, excuse me, is that the only source? So one of the most important things we do, forget the corporate world, let's look at society and humanity. That's to me the most important civic responsible thing I can do as a woman and as a technologist. When we start holding accountability to organizations, safe space, they're not being bombarded with information that's going to make them feel inadequate, some form of bias built into their own behavior and ability and judgment on other societies. These are the more dangerous things that I think we're not aware of, or we're letting go by very quickly. The lack of controls, regulations, and frameworks that we had for social media is what I think we're now doing still with AI, because the guardrails are not there. The level of regulation isn't there. And when we start talking about quantum, it's going to be even worse. So when we start talking about trust, I believe that needs to be in the hands of civil society, corporates, and government, and academia, of course. It needs to be a multi-stakeholder collaboration to actually address the issues that are fast approaching us, and we are just blindly going in that direction. As a technologist, I love technology and believe it's great hope. But the way we are today, you just have to look at any young person who's online, who's been influenced so much by what they think is the real world, is really that's the risk that we need to address in Dallas.
Thank you. So for the final questions, what do you think is the most benefit and the most threat coming from what?
What's exciting to me is if you look at past examples of how technology has changed the world, is that we don't actually know, but we know it's going to do big things for us, right? And so you think about the Industrial Revolution, how it's just completely transformed the way not only we work, but also our education system, our systems of commerce, right? And then you look at the rise of the internet, and there was an explosion of globalization, information, social media, yes, with all its challenges, it's still pretty incredible that we can talk to anybody around the world whenever we feel like it. I think we take these aspects for granted, but actually they've just completely transformed our society. And so when I think about quantum, I don't even know what the applications will be that will completely transform our lives. So I think it's both exciting and it's also a huge challenge to make sure that we do this ethically when we don't even know what some of the applications will be, right? And so we're seeing this again with the last wave of technology improvements with the rise of social media, right? There was the hype, there was the excitement, and now we're seeing actually this can be very destructive because we didn't build in the ethical components from the beginning. So I think it's a great lesson for us all that we need to have these conversations, that we need to be engaged in the work, but that it will be messy and that it will be incomplete.
Thank you very much. I think the biggest risk I see is security, because now with the quantum power, encryption is easy to do. We are living in a world today where all of our data is online. Data manipulation hacking easy to do. Without having ethics in our behavior and our ability to monitor and a global governance structure to see what's going on, we are a great risk in that area. So to me, that's one very important factor. And the fact that it's in the hands of one group of people. That's another crippling for the global democracy. If quantum is in the hands of a few corporations or countries, what's going to happen to the rest of the world? The potential for exploitation is huge. The advantage. I'm a technologist, so I love technology. I think healthcare, number one, is proactive data analytics of DNA diseases so that we can stop diseases like cancer, understand how we can do accurate imaging. To me, there's a great opportunity in that area. I also think logistics. One of our key initiatives at the moment is smart corridors in Africa to build resilient food systems. I am a great optimist that by integrating smart technology and integrating basically clean renewable energy, we will be able to stop 40% of perishable food from dying on its journey across these corridors of trade, which means the price will be right. More people will be able to afford it, particularly women, pregnant women, so that they have healthy babies or they're able to produce milk. So I'm very taking technology right down to the grassroots of how it can make a difference if it's handled properly with integrity. So much.
Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you. It was a pleasure. And I wish you all successful and very informative 2025 in Davos. I know that you all have to run to the next meetings. Davos is really busy. Thank you for taking the time for this Davos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Really lucky to be with you.
Thank you for some really interesting perspective.
Nice building with each other. I really love that. See, that's a lady thing. Not trying to cut each other out.
Isn't it nice? Much better, like they work together as a team and not always competition.
No,
Like who's the
I see.
better. This is
I tell you what, Karl,
one second.
is it off? Sorry.